Well, 2023 was a mixed year for certain things. It definitely wasn't for games. I really appreciate to be alive in a year where gaming is just really at a peak for me. Smushy, dushy, a lot of talk. But let's get into the games of the year. Ooh. I got two cats surrounding me and they're gonna attack me. So starting off at number 10, we have Final Fantasy 16, which I'll be straight up, there's a lot of things that disappointed me in this game, and I was wishing this would be a higher one by the end of the year. But what Final Fantasy 16 does so well is it crafts this amazing narrative, world lore, and just puts these performances that are just so memorable with these characters that you really grow to love. The world is super interesting. Obviously, it has a lot of Game of Thrones inspiration, where there's all this deep lore of stuff that honestly doesn't even affect the main story at times. It's just interesting lore to build out the reality and the realisticness of this universe and everything. And I love it so much. Now, the combat starts off really fun while you gain a bunch of different powers. You can utilize those differently throughout the game and learn combos and everything that work with those. I will say the combat does get boring after a time once you kind of figure out usual combo and then you just spam the same kind of abilities. So that does get a little dull after times. And unfortunately, the pacing of this game is horrendous, and the world is pretty dull. Despite having cool lore, the actual design of the worlds is dull. So that was a big letdown. But what actually is the best part of this game is the phenomenal boss fights. They're some of the best of this year, and honestly, some of the best I've ever experienced in general. The boss fights are so memorable. If you don't like anime, you probably won't love this, right? And it's interesting because it goes for more of like a Game of Thrones, like kind of dark fantasy approach, and then it has these huge anime battles, which obviously are really silly in context, but just really work in this game for me, and probably what people remember the most out of this game. At number 9, we have Hi-Fi Rush, which is an action rhythm beat 'em up game from Capcom. A lot of people were talking about this game in like January when it came out, and I feel like it's fallen a little bit out of the discussion for Game of the Year, which is a shame because it was such a fun, unique game where the combat is based off his hitting combos within a rhythm, right? Everything in this world is pulsating to a beat, and it's all this amazing like rock music that they made for this game, and the whole game is built around that. Your combos, your movement, everything. And it's such a unique battle system that makes a lot of sense when you say it, but when you're playing as like a rock star guy with a mechanical arm, which maybe is not the most unique sounding concept, but the way they do the combat is just super fun and unique, and has all these different combos for how you hit things on timing. And it's just like a really well crafted combat system, which does get a little repetitive due to boring enemy design. But I feel like this, out of any game, is one of those games that would be really fortunate to get a second one because it could iterate that on that even more. But in terms of this one, the story is engaging. The personality of this game is what will sell it for a lot of people. It has this cell shaded, a lot of personality, cartoony, rock, very Western kind of goofiness, right? And some really memorable boss fights and a fun kind of like, capitalistic, big government, ruin corporation, evil, whatever thing. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun. The story keeps you engaged. The characters are awesome. You can upgrade things, and it doesn't overstay its welcome with its length. So at number 8, we have Armored Core 6. Never played an Armored Core. Played some mech games, some Gundam games in the past, but I mean, like, in terms of just straight combat, this is probably some of the best that we got this year, if not the best. You design your own mech, which is like the big fun of this. And while there is kind of a meta to it, which ruins it a little bit, you can design the mech how you want. You can do like more of a melee build. You can do just gun, you make a fast one. You have Gatling guns. You can have swords, guns, shotguns, whatever, right? And it gives you so much freedom with that. And it's interesting because that is a huge element of the gameplay. It's not just hey, you can do this. A huge element is the strategy and planning of every battle. And what this game does so well is it gives you challenging combat without making it overly frustrating, which is something that, the Soulsborne kind of people know how to do. And while I'm not always the biggest fan of Soulsborne as a whole in terms of its gameplay loop, this was totally up my alley. And the boss fights are super memorable, and the gameplay is fast and action packed, or it could be slow and steady. You build how you want, you play it, and it's like, dude, you're playing as a mech, and it's fun, and the combat feels clean and tight and everything, and it's enjoyable. And also, they throw in like a narrative that is surprisingly like well done. You see no people's faces in this game. It's all just the voice acting, but you still feel so close to all these characters, and it's such a human story in a lot of ways. And it's not something that you really think about in the beginning because it just seems kind of generic at first. Then you realize you really care about these characters, and it keeps on going. And yeah, I mean, this is just some of the most fun I had in terms of straight gameplay. And while a lot of the missions start to get repetitive, and if you play the game, if you have to replay the game a bit to get some of the other endings, which is annoying. The first time around, this, it's a fun 10-hour experience that is just like a blast to play. At number 7, we have Jedi Survivor, the sequel to Jedi Fallen Order. I think this did everything that a sequel should do. It iterated on the best parts of the other game and fixed the issues that we had. Traveling is easier now. The powers feel great, and it feels like you have more options with them. Combat just feels so fun in this one. I know some people were maybe a little mixed on the design. The first one feeling a little more Sekiro-esque and kind of like almost copy-paste in a lot of ways of that, with a little less clean. I felt this one kind of came to its own, taking that formula and then iterating on it a little bit and making it feel a little bit more of its own. Lightsaber combat is kind of the best we've ever had in a game, really. I mean, the lightsaber to lightsaber duels work really well, but also the lightsaber to enemy duels work really well, which is the thing I feel like a lot of Star Wars games struggle with. They either make the lightsaber duels right, or they get the combat right against normal enemies, and they do both of them. It still has the hack and slash element, but it feels like you still have to pay attention to each enemy. You have to time your blocks, your parries, and everything. And yeah, it's just, combat is so good. And then they carve up a really interesting narrative. You really care about these characters around the second game. The first game, I think, got me introduced to these characters, and I started caring about them. But the second game made me really love and fall in love with these characters. Raquel Kestis is now one of my, maybe not one of my favorite Star Wars characters, but just a really good character in the franchise that really feels like he fits, and all his side characters and everyone else around it are great. The villains are definitely a letdown, and I think the story as a whole is a little messier than it should have been, but it sets up a great character arc, and I think that's what really the story's strength is the character arcs it goes through, more so than the actual narrative that it tells. And lastly, just the worlds are super fun to explore. Some of them, again, are letdowns. I feel like some of them were better planned than others and are the more expansive ones, but you get a really well-crafted world that it's its own thing. It's not like a Hoth or a Tatooine. It's just completely its own thing, and it feels like there's a lot of heart and care, and just like fans came into the franchise and made some like worlds that I'll like always remember from Star Wars. At number 6, Street Fighter 6. Yeah, I'm not the biggest fighting game guy. I enjoy them, but as someone who's more of like a single player guy, what the fuck? Street Fighter 6 kind of came in and did everything that was hopeful. It made it so that it's newcomer friendly, right? With a great high skill ceiling where, yeah, a new person could come in and learn the combos and everything, and they make it really engaging and enjoyable, right? But there's also a lot you can still learn, so it doesn't feel like you're just cheesing the whole game. And I'm very clearly someone who knows the classic control scheme can beat you. The character designs are updated and modernized, which I think were for the best, but they all look really good. The models are great, the environments are great, and the whole style of this game with this like kind of like city, street, like graffiti kind of style is like really works well in the franchise, which is not something I expected, but it just adds like a whole like level of just like cool, and the music is great, and just like the, I don't know, personality of the game is cool, and obviously like the fighting is great. It's clean combat. I'm not smart enough to comment on every intricacy of the fighting game formula and everything, but it worked well for me. It's great for newcomers and everything, and best of all, they have a single player mode that is actually great. It's a mode where you create your own character, and then you can run around the world and just battle other people, and then you meet the other characters and everything. And while the narrative is not really like much of anything, right? It's such a unique way to tackle that approach, where a lot of fighting games get stuck where you only have 10 other enemies you can fight, and the story somehow has to work around that. But this one does that, where you can create infinite characters, right? And they just take move styles from other characters, right? So while you are fighting a familiar move style, and you're still learning and building up your character and learning what works for you and learning how to combat other things, you are fighting different character designs and elements and different strengths and different powers, maybe different bonuses. So it was a really smart way to get around the issue that I have with a lot of fighting games. And they put it in an open world, and it's fun to explore. And it's not like, maybe a Witcher 3 open world, but it's just a cool, fun like way to do a fighting game single player. So, and it taught me how to street fight, which is the best part. At number 5, we have Mario Wonder. The Super Mario World is my favorite Mario game of all time, and like people sleep on the 2D Mario games, especially considering we haven't had one in a long time. And I feel like a lot of younger generations don't even remember 2D Mario, or the last ones I think were on the Wii, and those were kind of like a little mid, at least for like Mario standards. but this one comes back and does what a 2D Mario should do. It brings in new elements, it keeps the tight controls, and even makes it feel a little bit better. Momentum feels great, jumping feels great. You have a bunch of different characters, there's local multiplayer that works well. The main gimmick of this game is the wonder powers, right? So you take acid and then you go into this wonder world, and the level that you're playing changes into a weird kind of trippy hippie world, and every level has this, right? So every level you're playing has a straight up like great level design, really interesting worlds, whether it be like these towers or these deserts or whatever, right? But then you have a different variation where you either turn into like a different monster, or like something's chasing you, or things are moving, or music's playing. Like it's they have so much creativity, and that's what you want to see in a Mario game. That's what Nintendo does so well. It is just so creative, and you think that they do everything you already know in a 2D game, but they change it up and they add little things. And like, while some of the levels are a little too easy and the boss fights are letdowns, right? There's so much creativity oozing from this. The new powers all work really well, and it's just like a fun 10-hour experience with a lot of replayability and a great time with someone else, which, you know, I don't have someone else. Just gonna have my girlfriend, but she doesn't want to play with me all the time. But it was fun when she was there, and yeah. And number 4 is Spider-Man 2, which was my most anticipated game of this year because of how much I just love Spider-Man 1. Spider-Man 2, like Jedi Survivor, iterates on all the best parts of Spider-Man 1 and surpasses it in some ways in the gameplay, but doesn't in some of the narrative ways. From a gameplay perspective, you're playing as both Miles and Peter, and that was a big worry initially, but wow, do they get it so down seamlessly where you can switch between and it feels natural, and they both have their own power sets, which, as you saw in Miles has his electricity and invisibility powers, but then they give Peter his more tech powers and the symbiote powers. So there's a great distinction in how you can build both these characters. They play very differently, while you still have the base combat of dodging, punching, webbing and stuff. They have these different powers that really change how you approach combat and everything, and it's awesome, right? Because you have such a huge playground to play with, and you have all these enemies, and they just really get combat down. And then on top of that, this is the best traversal I've ever played in a game. And no, like, I'm such a sucker for traversing around an open world just in a fun way, and they did it, right? They somehow made the web swinging even better. With a faster load speeds, the swinging is faster. They added the web suit where you can glide, and that's not something I really thought would matter much because you see gliding in a lot of games, but it just controls so well in this game. And they obviously put so much time into that, and there's nothing more fun than just swinging around through a city that feels very populated this time. They added so much more to the city where you can go to Queens and Brooklyn now, which is something you never really get to do in other Spider-Man games. So you see different environments instead of just Manhattan, which I feel is overused, obviously. And while I think the narrative, without spoilers, does not live up to the first game, it is still really good, and it adds a lot of like personal characterization. And I feel like they struggled a little bit to find a good balance between Miles and Peter's story, but overall it somehow all comes together pretty well. There's a lot of deep moments, there's moments of heart and levity and great messages, and just like a lot of like standout moments. And I think they also made the boss battle so much better in this game, which was a huge win. So overall, great game. A few things holding it back, and maybe a little too brief, but Seabird is now my favorite song of all time. So, rip. And number 3, we have Tears of the Kingdom. Again, like, this kind of game, this open world kind of like sandbox game, is usually not my kind of thing. I love open world, but sandbox games are not usually my thing. But Tears of the Kingdom just does it so well, where it encourages you really just to go seek out and explore in this huge playground. And it gives you these powers which show off the strength of Zelda's team's like physics engine, and that's what this game is. It's like a physics engine that you just get to play around in this huge thing, and there's so much attention to detail and so many things and so many different approaches to literally every piece of combat. While the new powers are a little too OP and they give you in the beginning, which does trivialize a lot of the shrines, which is a shame. There's so many different ways to approach everything in this game, and they just add more and more powers, and you get different elements and things to use, and it's like you can use that for puzzles, you can use it for combat, or you can just use it for whatever. And it's not just in the main story where you're doing all this, right? The main story, just random things you find, the side missions, the puzzles, everything. And while, look, I'm not the most experienced person, I didn't do everything in this game like some people, or spend hundreds of hours, right? It's just a lot of fun. And even the building mechanics, which I feel are never the most fun in my opinion, because you feel slightly limited because you're either building some kind of ship or car, right? I still found them a lot of fun, and the bosses in this game are like extremely fun, like just so fun, and like the perfect kind of Nintendo boss where they aren't too difficult aside from maybe Ganon, but they offer like such a creative way to beat them, and you have different approaches to that still. And look, I'm not the most knowledgeable of Zelda or anything, but like from someone who's kind of like only played Breath of the Wild and dabbled in a few of the other games, right? It just takes what I loved about Breath of the Wild and just makes it better. The boss fights are better, the combat feels a little cleaner, the powers feel a little less limited, and I think they just said, hey, let's just go full out and give you everything. And like to create solutions that you see online, and while I'm not the kind of person to come up with a lot of those, right? It's just insane what you can do and the ways you can use the physics engine, which is so unique and interesting, and you know the world feels like more lively, and there's all these things to discover, and like there's so much to do that you just don't have to do. You want to, you know. In other games they entice you with like better armor and stuff like that, and this game does that too. But I don't know, it just feels like so peaceful. It's such a comfort game. And on top of that, it's still able to put like a really beautiful swordsman rescues the princess kind of thing with all this lore and everything, and it's beautiful, right? You know, they really wanted this to be like a conclusion kind of piece, and when people were like, hey, this is a sequel to Breath of the Wild, people were like, why? It's kind of proved why in a lot of situations. And while I do think the Sky World was kind of disappointing and the Underground World is just whatever, right? What it does well is still great, and I don't think it's maybe the 10 out of 10 some people say, but just from a casual fan, like I can understand why this is a comfort game and why you can just get lost in this world and play this for hours. At number 2, look, it's Baldur's Gate 3. I totally want this to win Game of the Year, and fully admit I'm only like 20 hours into this, so by the time I beat this game, it easily probably will be my number 1. Before I am right now, it is my number 2. Look, I mean, this is probably a new genre for a lot of people, right? The D&D kind of esque RPG is probably not something a lot of people are useful, and I'll fully admit that this is my first time playing a game of this sort. And the thing is, it's overwhelming in a lot of ways, but it makes you want to still play. I feel like a lot of games will overwhelm me, and I'll just kind of lose interest because it's too much. But this game is overwhelming in the best way possible. Thank God I played a little bit of D&D before this, and I had my girlfriend who's a D&D person to kind of help me out with certain things. But the game is just so expansive, but in a good way, right? You can literally approach combat, and I know I've said it with everything, every game ever, and I've said that probably a few times, but you literally can approach everything with so many different pathways. You have all these different builds, all these different weapons, all these different powers, all these different character actions. You can just do random things, and that'll set off the characters. They'll react in different ways. You can do these different dialogue options, or select these different things, or go these places first. It's just so expansive, but the thing is, nothing feels like an afterthought. A lot of times when you do things, the games always kind of wrap you back up into the main pathway that they want, but it's literally flawless. You can do whatever you want, and you can do whatever pathway, and characters still react properly. There's voice acting for everything, right? And amazing voice acting at that. It's amazing narratives. There's these side stories and campaigns that you don't even have to even think about, or you can miss, that are just so amazing and better than the stories and campaigns and you get in like other full games. And there's so many different ways to build. There's so many replayability. The game's expansive, and like this animations feel actually well thought out for anything. Like everything that you do is just so exciting and engaging. And I don't know, I was thrust into this world and it's like, wow, like I get it, right? And I think that's the same feeling almost everyone who has played it has got. It's like, maybe this is not my usual thing, and even if it is your usual thing, it's still great for the people who are used to this kind of franchise. It's just, man, it's just wild how much and how exciting and how cool the combat is. They made turn-based fun, which at times isn't for a lot of people, and it's like, I don't know, it, as someone who played D&D and like enjoyed it to a degree, right? Like this is like kind of gets me back into that fantasy feeling. Now, number 1, Resident Evil 4 Remake. This is everything I love about games, right? There's not a dull moment in this game. Every other game I've said here has a few moments that were dull, or maybe more when you're talking about Final Fantasy 16. Everything in this game just feels so meticulously well crafted, right? The combat feels so clean, right? Every mechanic just works flawlessly, right? Whether that be the pairing, the way you move, every single weapon, right? They don't overdo it with mechanics or things and everything, but they do it so cleanly, right? And the level design, every single combat situation feels well thought out of, right? You can be fighting the same kind of enemies, but they are laid out in different ways, or there are different environment things you can use, and every level feels like different, whether you're in the mansion or you're outside or you're in a cave or a tavern or even like on water. It's like everything is just so fun, and it's just like such a fun experience that is tight and clean. And I really had to think out how I did some combat situations, but it wasn't like frustrating, right? And I felt like I had different approaches to that while still utilizing kind of maybe a smaller arsenal of things. And on top of that, you still get a narrative that's like fun, and the game doesn't take itself too seriously, but it does get the drama moments well. So there's like goofy moments and drama moments and characters you actually really care about, and great voice acting. And the narrative, while like not the deepest, really works to keep you engaged in what's going on. And the world design and everything, the music, the sound design especially, and all the attention to detail, where you all these little things you do that you don't even think will affect things will like cause like something different, or like things you didn't know about. Like obviously the main one of shooting the bell in the beginning of the game will take all the people, go ahead to the people to the church earlier. There's just so many like little random details they put in it. And like I'll fully admit, I never really played RE4, so a lot of people, I understand some of the criticisms and also understand maybe this isn't as fresh to them, and maybe a remake as number one is weird. But for me, as like someone who's going to this for the first time, was super excited for this. And I've played a few of the other Resident Evil games. I mean, this is far and none my favorite. I mean, from the way it controls, the story, the level design, I just didn't have a dull moment in it. And someone maybe where I'm at in life, just a 15-hour experience that is just pure fun and doesn't slow down, and just, I don't know, I can just appreciate a 15-hour game that is just so fun, has really few flaws aside from some of the boss fights, which I'm not going to nitpick too much at this point, but I had some issues with those. But everything else like is just so exciting, and the main combat and just situations, I don't know. There was no game that like kept my interest as long as this and just made me play it all the way through, which is why RE4 Remake, for right now, is my favorite game of the year. And a few honorable mentions. I missed a lot of the indie games, which really sucks. I know there's some really great ones. Dredge, Humanity, Pizza Tower, Dave the Diver, Space Road Unbound. I know are amazing games. I just didn't get to, and it's frustrating, but probably would have been some of my favorite games. It's just a lot of things to play this year. Yakuza Ishin was my 11th best favorite game of the year, which like spin-off Yakuza games are always so much fun. And I feel like this deserves a lot of attention as well, because you're a samurai in the ninja in the Yakuza world, and the fun, goofy combat and crazy side stories and engaging narratives. And it's fun when you can play a Yakuza game that's kind of self-contained, so it feels a little bit more approachable. Still has some fun with Diablo 4. I'm new to the franchise, so as a co-op experience with some friends, I found it fun, but I totally get from a longevity standpoint, it wasn't great for a lot of fans. And the big one I missed, Alan Wake 2, only Game of the Year nomination I missed, and we'll definitely play it one day. Just something that came out in a busy month, and just haven't got around to it as I was trying to catch up on my backlog. But I really am happy that the game was so well received. And that's my top 10 games of 2023. I recorded this like a month ago and am just editing it now, which is why I forgot to do an outro. So this is a voice only outro because I'm looking rough right now. But yeah, thanks for watching as usual. At least I'm finally getting this out, I think. And yeah, everyone already knows what top 10 games of last year were. So hype for 2024 or something. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Live long, prosper, enjoy. Yeah.